The US may have lost one old ally in Saudi Arabia, but is it on the verge of losing another one too? I'm talking about Pakistan. Today, Islamabad received its first cargo of discounted Russian oil. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif called it a transformative day, the dawn of a new relationship between Russia and Pakistan. He sounds thrilled, to be honest. And why won't he? Who doesn't like cheap oil? You see, Pakistan's economy is on the verge of collapse. Energy payments make up for most of its external payments. So cheaper crude is in Pakistan's interest. But guess who won't be too stoked about it? The United States. Imagine this, your longtime ally signing a deal with your enemy. But that's geopolitics for you. Historical ties hardly matter when your economy is crumbling. The question is, but how did Pakistan get here? Murmurs of a deal with Russia began last year. Finance Minister Ishaq Dar was the first to mention it. He said Pakistan was considering buying Russian oil. Ironically, he cited India's example. Dar said New Delhi was buying Russian oil for cheap, so Islamabad had the right to explore this avenue too. Soon, Pakistan's petroleum minister flew to Moscow. His name is Musaddiq Malik. On his return, he had an important announcement to make. He said Russia would provide Pakistan with discounted crude. The prospect made them happy, but it was short-lived. That same month, Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari visited Washington, and there he shot down any plans of purchasing Russian oil. That was December 2022. 1 month later, things changed again. A Russian delegation arrived in Islamabad. They were there to finalize the oil deal. By April, Pakistan had already placed its first order. Fast forward to today, and the first cargo of Russian oil has reached Islamabad. So are Bhutto's statements just hogwash? Or did he not want to anger Washington while on its soil? Either way, the developments pose a problem for America. You see, Pakistan and Russia have a troubled history, and most of that is thanks to the US. In 1950, Moscow invited Pakistan's first prime minister for a visit. Islamabad declined. Instead, it accepted Washington's invite. That snub did not go down too well with Moscow. Then came the Cold War. Pakistan was Washington's crucial ally during that period. It even provided its air bases to the United States. Again, in 1980, the US backed Afghan insurgencies against the Soviet invasion. Pakistan was at the forefront of that. Long story short, there's a lot of bad blood between Moscow and Islamabad. Then what explains the oil deal? Well, economics and politics. Russia wants to sell oil, Pakistan wants to buy cheap oil. As for the politics, Pakistan's ties with the US are deteriorating. The Biden administration was cold to Imran Khan. Then he visited Russia, right on the eve of the Ukraine war. Terrible timing, you would think, but for Imran Khan, this was the perfect opportunity. He was trying to forge ties with Moscow. Well, as things turned out, he was ousted from office. Since then, the generals in Pakistan have tried some damage control with the US. Meanwhile, the Russians are seeking out allies and buyers of oil. Anyone they can find, even Pakistan. They want economic ties, not defense cooperation yet. Russia says a weak Pakistan will not be good for the region, neither for India nor for Afghanistan. Also, this deal gives them a new market to sell their oil. For Pakistan, it's like getting the best of both worlds, cheap Russian oil on one hand and Western military support on the other. Because remember, despite all of this, Washington is still giving them military support, including the most recent upgrade of F-16s worth $450 million. So the question is, how is America allowing all of this? Pakistan remains their major non-NATO ally, amongst the biggest recipients of their military aid. Have the Americans lost sway over the generals, like the Arab sheikhs? Or are they sanctimonious lectures only for countries like India? Meanwhile, another Russian partner is in the headlines. I'm talking about North Korea. Their supreme leader, Kim Jong-un, has issued a statement of support for Russia and President Vladimir Putin. North Korean state media published the message earlier today. Let me quote from what it says. Justice is sure to win, and the Russian people will continue to add glory to the history of victory. Kim went on to say that he would be, and I'm quoting, he would be holding hands firmly with the Russian president in conformity with the common desire of the peoples of the two countries to fulfill the grand goal of building a powerful country. Yes, Kim Jong-un spoke about holding hands with Putin. The message came today on the occasion of Russia's National Day. June 12, 1990, is when Russia adopted a new constitution. This was after the fall of the Soviet Union. And June 12 is now a public holiday in Russia, which explains the timing of Kim's heartfelt message to Putin. But this isn't the first time that Kim has publicly shown support for Putin. He's been firmly in Putin's camp since Russia invaded Ukraine last year. He has continuously blamed the West. He accuses them of forcing Russia's hand. When the war began last February, this is what North Korea said, and I'm quoting again, "The root cause of the Ukraine crisis totally lies in the hegemonic policy of the US and the West, which enforce themselves in high-handedness and abuse of power against other countries." So Kim's latest tribute to Putin is a continuation of the same stand. This time, though, he did not mention the war. He praised what he called Putin's correct decision and guidance against hostile forces. Now, you may wonder, why such a show of support? Other Russian allies like China have maintained neutrality, or at least pretended to, even offered a peace plan that seems to have sunk without a trace. But North Korea is not talking peace. It is only professing its support for Russia. And this is a relationship that goes back many decades. In fact, it would be fair to say that the Soviet Union helped give birth to North Korea and the Kim dynasty. Here's a quick primer. Before the Koreas were divided, it was one nation under Japanese occupation. This was during the Second World War. It was Japanese-held Korea. Soviet troops entered from the north to liberate Korea. The Americans came in from the other side to resist. They did not want a communist regime to take over Korea. So the Americans and the Soviets fought a proxy war here. They created two occupation zones in Korea, a Soviet zone and an American zone. They divided Korea along the 38th parallel. What is the 38th parallel? The line that is still the border between the two Koreas. There were plans for reunification, but Moscow and Washington did not trust each other, so each installed their own governor in Korea. Do you know who is North Korea's governor? Kim Il-sung, the grandfather of the current leader Kim Jong-un. So the relationship is old, and both sides have maintained it. Moscow and Pyongyang. They've maintained the relationship. Russia regularly shields North Korea at the United Nations. It has resisted Western sanctions against Pyongyang, and the North does face a lot of sanctions, mostly over their nuclear and ballistic missile programs. Moscow also has trade and humanitarian ties with North Korea. In March, the US reported that Russia was sending food to Pyongyang. This is March this year. North Korea suffered a devastating drought last year, and a major food crisis has followed. In recent years, in fact, Pyongyang has also been dependent on China for food imports, but of late, China has not been of much help. It was restricting food exports because of the Wuhan virus. So instead of Beijing, this time Moscow decided to help. And this may seem like a generous humanitarian move, but experts say this was a quid pro quo. That in exchange for food, North Korea gave weapons to Russia, missiles to help in the ongoing war. North Korea, of course, has denied all of this, but there's no doubt that its links to Russia run deep. The Hermit Kingdom has a lot to thank Moscow for, and Kim's words and public display of support are proof. The Americans, too, are grappling with the China threat, much closer home than they'd anticipated, perhaps. There is a Chinese spying station in America's backyard, and the US is reluctant to even admit it. Last week, a report shook up Washington. It talked about an agreement between China and Cuba. The story said China wants to build a spy base in Cuba, wants to, and Havana will be paid billions for it. The White House responded with a denial, and now they've made a U-turn. Turns out, China already has a snooping station in Cuba. So a statement has been issued. It gives a detailed account of China's activities. Apparently, the snooping base has been there for decades. The exact location has not been shared, but back in 2019, China upgraded this facility. We don't have the specifics of what it can do, but a base in Cuba gives Beijing some clear advantages. The island is around 100 miles or 160 kilometers from Florida, Cuba. From there, China can target Southeast America. It can eavesdrop on US military exchanges, even commercial communication. The bigger worry is the potential snooping on US military bases. There are dozens of them in the region, including some very important ones, like the headquarters of the US Central Command. It oversees West Asia and parts of Central and South Asia. There is also the US Special Operations Command. Again, this is an important military base, and China could potentially eavesdrop on it. Its presence in Cuba poses a threat. And until last week, the US did not even want to admit to this. When the first report came out, this is what the White House said. I've seen that press report. It is not accurate. These were their words. The Pentagon, too, pushed back against these claims.
So I've seen that reporting. I can tell you based on the information that we have that is not accurate, that we are not aware of China and Cuba developing any type of spy stations.
Not accurate. That's what he said. Now the US has completely reversed its stance. So what is Team Biden's defense? Well, they're shifting blame. They say it did not happen on our watch. Reports say Biden and his team were briefed about these developments when they took office. I'm talking about January 2021. And Cuba is just one country they were told about. Back then, China was considering setting up such bases all over the world: the Atlantic, Latin America, West Asia, Central Asia, Africa, the Indo-Pacific. It seems every one was on China's radar. And how does the US plan to counter this? Through diplomacy, they say. American officials say they're engaging with countries across the world. They're trying to stop China from executing its plans. In response, this is what China has to say.
Last week, I already made clear China's position over the relevant question. Over the past 2 days, we have seen the US government and media releasing a great deal of inconsistent information on the alleged construction of so-called Chinese spy facilities in Cuba. Once again, this is just a farce put on by the self-contradictory US.
China says these claims are a farce. They don't have many buyers, though. But there is a larger question here. It is about the United States and its China policy. It seems confused, to say the least. One day they talk about decoupling with China. The next day they talk about de-risking. They want to lead the world in countering China, but turns out they're trying to hide a Chinese spy base in their backyard. How do you think America's allies will see this? There will be questions, no doubt. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is traveling to China in a few days. Will he bring up these snooping stations? Will he confront China? We don't know that yet. But this visit will be a test for Biden's China policy, and the world will be watching closely. China snooping on the US may be what great spy flicks are made of. But if you're looking for some good old drama, tune into some UK politics. There is no end to the drama here. On Sunday, former Scottish leader Nicola Sturgeon was arrested. She was questioned by the police for over 7 hours. Sturgeon was released soon after. She was quick to proclaim her innocence, but the arrest sent shockwaves through Scottish politics. Sturgeon's arrest was part of a financial probe. The police are investigating her party, the Scottish National Party, or SNP. They're looking into the party's funding and finances. In April this year, they arrested Sturgeon's husband. This time, it was her turn. So what is this investigation about? Time for a quick backstory. Scotland and England united to form Great Britain in the year 1707. But soon, Scotland got tired of this arrangement. It wanted its own government. Enter the referendums of 1979 and then 1999. These gave Scotland its own parliament, but not the much-needed independence it desired. So in 2014, Scotland voted in a referendum for independence. 55% voted to stay, 45% wanted to walk out. So obviously, no independence for Scotland. But the Scottish National Party, or SNP, wanted to give it another go. So this party asked for funds for another referendum campaign. More than £600,000 were donated to the party. That's around $750,000 US. These donations were made by activists. It was supposed to be for Scottish independence, but it looks like these funds were diverted. In 2021, the police received complaints about this. So they launched Operation Branch Form. First, Sturgeon's husband, also the party's chief executive, was questioned. Second, the party headquarters were raided. And third, the party treasurer was arrested. And now Sturgeon has been questioned too. She may have been released for now, but this scandal has plunged her party, the SNP, into a deep crisis. Many in the party want Nicola Sturgeon suspended. And this could be a tough call for her successor, the new First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf. But for the so-called Queen of Scots, this is a spectacular fall from grace. Sturgeon was once one of Britain's most formidable politicians, one of the UK's most formidable politicians. But her resignation as First Minister in February and the financial probe right now means that Sturgeon is no longer the invincible presence she once was. And she's not the only one in trouble. There is more drama in UK politics. Meet Boris Johnson, the embattled former UK Prime Minister, the man who was the source of many scandals. 2 days ago, Boris Johnson resigned as a Member of Parliament. He saw the findings of the Partygate investigation committee. You may remember Partygate. When the whole country was in lockdown, Boris Johnson and his team were apparently partying. It led to a scandal. It forced Johnson to resign as Prime Minister. And now it looks like it may have cost him his seat in the Parliament too. Johnson called the findings a witch hunt. And he jumped the gun. He quit before he could be forced out. Now, Johnson and Sturgeon are very different leaders, and these are two very different cases. But they do have something in common. They're not giving their successors, Humza Yousaf and Rishi Sunak, an easy time. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with Egypt. A tourist boat caught fire off the Red Sea coast. 3 British tourists have gone missing. In the US, a major highway collapsed in the state of Pennsylvania. This happened after a truck under the highway caught fire. And in South Korea, a British man tried to climb the world's 6th tallest building without ropes. He was halfway up the skyscraper when authorities intervened. The man has been detained now. And finally, what makes the 12th of June significant? We're taking you back in history. On this day in 1964, Nelson Mandela was sentenced to life imprisonment. The man who dared to oppose the apartheid regime in South Africa was accused of sabotage. In his 27-year jail term, Mandela was confined to a small cell and was forced into hard labor, but he remained unbroken. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
كافر
كابس كم كافر واحد
يوم هذول كنا